Welcome to this video about anxiety. What is anxiety? Anxiety is simply when we feel scared, worried, or panicked about something. Brains have an inbuilt alarm system, warning us when we need to keep ourselves safe. This alarm triggers what is known as the fight or flight response. This is when your body prepares to either run away, fight, or freeze. Everyone gets anxious. Everyone feels worried and stressed at times. Anxiety is a normal part of the human experience. It functions to provide us with important signals that we may need to take some kind of action. It can be reasonably expected that many pupils will feel anxious at times when in school. Completing challenging tasks, being asked questions, dealing with changes, studying for exams, and having deadlines can all lead to feelings of some stress and anxiety. For most pupils, this should usually be manageable. These feelings may pass, or they may be tolerable. Stress. Stress is a natural response to challenging situations we face and the feelings of anxieties that arise from thinking about them. Whilst everyone experiences stress to some extent, stress can be overwhelming when it is particularly intense or long-lasting. It can be helpful to think of stress as a bucket. Anxiety linked with adverse life experiences. Some pupils who are presenting with anxiety difficulties may be in families where there are high levels of stress, conflict, and dysfunctional interactions. This may include features of relatives with physical or mental health conditions, limited parental capacity to care adequately for their children, loss and bereavement, separation, divorce, and other changes in the family dynamic, young carers, parents with an overprotective parenting style, emotional neglect, harsh and heavily disciplinary approaches, parents with a history of difficult interactions with professionals, and living in unsafe neighbourhoods. Schools and anxiety in general. Schools are, by their nature, challenging environments with novel intellectual, social, and sensory experiences. Teachers are expected to set work that maximise progress. Inevitably, this involves introducing new information and increasingly difficult concepts. Schools are also socially challenging places where young people who are generally resilient mix with peers who are vulnerable and/or have additional needs, which can lead to barriers in learning. When anxiety becomes a problem. Anxiety becomes a problem for a pupil when it is ongoing or recurring frequently, with the pupil feeling stuck with their worries, or it leads to avoidance in everyday tasks and challenges, or it negatively affects their general functioning and resilience, including in their capacity to progress with their schoolwork and to maintain good relationships with staff and peers. Persistent and significant difficulties with anxiety that interfere with daily activities may sometimes be diagnosed by mental health professionals as an anxiety disorder, which is an SEMH need. There are many different possible underlying factors, and this can affect anyone. It is not a personality trait, and it's not always obvious. Types of anxiety. There are different types of anxiety which a pupil with persistent and significant anxiety difficulties may experience. For example, generalized anxiety, social anxiety, which is an overwhelming fear of social situations, separation anxiety, which is a fear of separating from a caregiver, health anxiety, which is the fear of getting ill, specific phobias, a panic disorder, which is usually marked by panic attacks, and a combination of two or more of these types of anxiety. What do all pupils need from school? Pupils generally thrive in inclusive relational schools and classrooms, helping them to meet the following needs. A feeling of safety and containment, being under control. Knowing that other basic needs will be met, for example, their access to food, drink, and the toilet. Trust in adults. A sense of belonging. Secure relationships with people. Feeling that learning and making progress is enjoyable. Their strengths and interests and talents are accepted and nurtured, supporting the development of their sense of self. And feeling that they can cope, problem solve, self-regulate, and seek help when needed. General points of good practice to create a sense of containment and safety for pupils. Classroom preparation. A carefully planned and maintained classroom environment can foster a feeling of safety, compassion, and connectedness. This typically includes a generally uncluttered, well-organised, low arousal feel, clear paths for movement, other signs of visual structure to support organisation and task management, available of necessary resources, including any resources that may be required for some pupils with additional needs, a classroom layout that does not include any obvious signs of seating plans which would stigmatise pupils, and adaptations when necessary to facilitate different types of activities and in response to any seating plan issues. General points of good practice to create a sense of containment and safety for pupils. Lesson delivery. This includes setting a consistently positive culture from the outset by establishing a welcoming atmosphere. This includes meeting, greeting, and settling pupils at the beginning of lessons. Maintaining the volume and intonation you expect from pupils, avoiding shouting and aggressive tones. Recognizing small achievement using qualified praise to provide positive feedback as well as any tangible evidence of their successes to encourage positive self-talk. Demonstrating other effective boundary setting and behaviour management strategies, for example, refocusing pupils who are off task, some tactical ignoring, and reinforcing positive behaviours for learning. Letting the class know about any forthcoming changes to routine, and incorporating some humour and lightness into lessons. Thoughts that an anxious pupil might experience. A pupil who is significantly anxious will experience unhelpful thinking, where their mind fixates on a potential or perceived threat or uncertainty. This may take the form of scary thoughts, images and/or memories, as well as an impending sense of doom. Unhelpful thinking patterns may include threat scanning. This is when their mind searches the environment for what they fear consciously or subconsciously. It may include catastrophizing, when their mind jumps to worst-case scenarios. It may include hypothetical worries. This includes what-if thoughts, and they're typically about things they don't have much control over. It includes emotional reasoning. This is when their mind tells them their emotions reflect reality. And it also includes fortune telling, when their mind interprets predictions as facts. Symptoms of anxiety that a pupil might experience. Thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. The basic CBT model. How an anxious pupil might present. Anxious pupils can appear to be withdrawn, isolated, shy, quiet, and passive. However, some pupils experiencing significant anxiety do not present like this. They might be falling out with peers easily, generally disengaged, displaying notably poor learner resilience and not working productively, not contributing to class discussions, complaining of feeling ill, unwilling to talk with adults or generally uncooperative, overtly defiant, or demonstrating aggressive outbursts. A highly anxious pupil also might not present with any of these obvious signs. They may be masking how they feel when in lessons. Learning difficulties and anxiety. Pupils with other types of SEN, for example speech and language needs, dyslexia, or other types of specific learning difficulties, may have a history of literacy difficulties, not understanding instructions or language within lessons, difficulty learning and remembering vocabulary, difficulty asking for help, poor narrative skills, unable to explain what happened and why, being on time, and remembering to do tasks such as homework. This can lead to frustration, anxiety, possible social isolation and disengagement, and the fight, flight, or freeze response, that is, internalizing and externalizing behaviors. Empathy. Showing empathy is the main component of supportive interactions. Research has shown that teachers' display of empathy towards anxious and withdrawn pupils has been associated with improvements in how positively pupils think about themselves, impacting positively on their engagement in learning and reducing risks of not accessing education. Clearly connected with demonstrating empathy is the judicious application of reasonable adjustments. Reasonable adjustments. Reasonable adjustments are reasonable steps taken by teachers to remove barriers to learning and other possible disadvantages for pupils with SEND and indicators of SEND. These adjustments can be applied both in classrooms and in the wider school. There are many different types of reasonable adjustments. Common examples include specific seating plans, use of visual supports and prompts, adapted work materials, assistive technologies and specialised equipment, access arrangements for controlled assessments and exams, flexibility with uniform, using self-regulation items and passes and allowances, for example, early leave, time out, and movement breaks. Let's think about some common classroom adjustments that can be made for anxious pupils. Anxiety in and about lessons, some classroom concerns. When pupils express their significant anxieties about lessons to trusted adults, there are some common concerns that tend to arise. For example, some common anxieties are associated with a fear that in the classroom they will 1. Make a mistake, then 2. Be exposed to peer scrutiny, and then 3. Be shamed and rejected by their peers. Let's look at a few of these common concerns and consider some simple adjustments that can reduce a pupil's anxiety about their lessons. Classroom-based anxieties about peer humiliation. A pupil might experience fears about being humiliated in front of their peers, with anxieties about the possibility of performing in front of people or doing a presentation in front of the class. The teacher calling my name, for example, to answer a question or to come up to the front of the class. And this also applies to assemblies. What could you do? Alleviating classroom-based anxieties about peer humiliation. Talk one-to-one with the pupil about how they could still participate, but in a modified way. This still might make them feel a little bit uncomfortable, but to a tolerable point. It may be appropriate to avoid asking the pupil to answer questions or read in front of the class, unless they identify that they feel comfortable doing so. And once an agreed strategy is in place, assure them face-to-face that you will stick to this, and it can be reviewed later on. Classroom-based anxieties about peer rejection or conflict. A pupil might experience fears about peer rejection and conflict with anxieties about the possibility of sitting next to some people I'm not close to or don't know well, or having to change seats to sit near these peers, or other people in the class messing about. What could you do? Alleviating classroom-based anxieties about peer rejection or conflict. Establish the pupils and groups in the class who the pupil feels safest with. Consider whether seating arrangements are better closer to the door, a window, to the front or the back of the room, near a path for movement, or more enclosed. Implement the seating plan accordingly. and when possible, let the pupil know if there will be any seating plan changes for activities. Classroom-based anxieties about getting in trouble with the teacher. A pupil might experience fears related to failure, not meeting expectations, and being admonished by the teacher, with anxieties about the possibility of a strict teacher who I think might get cross, a teacher who I know sometimes punishes the whole class or group even if some people did nothing wrong, or sitting in the same area as people who do not get enough work done and who might stop me from finishing my work. What could you do? Alleviating classroom-based anxieties about getting in trouble with the teacher. Go out of your way to have eye contact with the pupil and to smile, especially at the beginning of the lesson. It might be necessary to say, in a very straightforward way, a comment directly to them that reinforces that they will not be getting in any trouble. For example, you are a well-behaved, hard-working pupil. I'm not going to be getting cross with you. Completely avoid sanctions for the whole class and group. But if you do, speak with the pupil directly to reassure them and be clear before, during, and/or afterwards. Classroom-based anxieties about homework and assessments. A pupil might experience fears related to homework, projects, and studying for tests and exams, with anxieties about the possibility of missing some of the homework when it is spoken about or said online. Homework that doesn't have right or wrong answers, for example, a research project, unlike a list of maths questions or a list of spellings to learn. Or a test that is coming up and not knowing the answers. What could you do? Alleviating classroom-based anxieties about homework and assessments. Be clear about what the homework is and when it is due, and that they can check for clarification. Break the homework or exam or test preparation down into smaller tasks and to-do lists. With projects, advise the pupil to complete an early draft so that they can show it before submitting their final piece of work. And remind the pupil that they can see you and/or check in with you to see how they're progressing. Interventions. Additional to class-based strategies, there are many different types of interventions which can be provided to a pupil who is experiencing anxiety. This can include sessions to support them to understand their anxious feelings, connecting their thoughts, feelings and behaviours, and learning self-regulation techniques such as distraction, self-soothing, mindfulness, meditation, breathing, grounding, visualization and relaxation. Some of the most common interventions include regular sessions with a peer mentor under the appropriate supervision of an adult, or a teaching assistant or higher level teaching assistant who might be known as a mentor, or a trained emotional literacy support assistant, or a trained therapist, such as a qualified and registered counsellor, play therapist, or psychologist. What is separation anxiety? Typically, children and young people experiencing feelings of separation anxiety persistently worry about being forgotten by their parent or carer. They fear that their parent or carer will be harmed, and they fear that their parent or carer will go away and won't return. Anxiety is part of normal childhood development and indicates the development of a close bond and attachment to their primary caregiver. It usually begins around 6 months of age and ends by the time they begin preschool or primary school. For most children, separation anxiety decreases and ceases as they gain confidence and adjust to attending school. Others will find it more difficult to adapt, leading to persisting problems, separating and possible periods of emotionally based school avoidance, and possibly wider SEMH difficulties, including other types of anxiety. What are some of the characteristics of separation anxiety? Pupils experiencing separation anxiety may exhibit one or more of the following signs. Being clingy, holding onto the parent's hand, arm, leg, clothing, or hiding behind the parent. Withdrawing from others. Excessive shyness. Physical, psychosomatic symptoms such as headaches, stomach aches, and vomiting. Crying hysterically. Shaking with fear. Temper tantrums. displaying a persistent lack of trust in teachers and/or other staff, and refusing to speak. Which pupils are generally more at risk of experiencing separation anxiety? Excessive separation anxiety can be more common in pupils with a parent and carer who is overprotective, misses opportunities to build the child's confidence and independence, focuses on negatives, reassures excessively and gives in to the child's demands, has unresolved trauma or grief that still impacts on their life, and has lingering concerns about the child and their learning. Some pupils also have a predisposition to fearful shyness, a tendency to shy away from novel situations. Where separation anxiety arises in part from a parent's own anxiety, both the parent and their child can fuel each other's anxiety, leading to a cycle of uneasiness and escalating anxiety. What are some of the possible triggers? Separation anxiety can be triggered or exacerbated by situations that pupils perceive to be distressing, including an unexpected late pickup, being left at school or at someone's home, an invitation to sleep at a friend's house, starting a new school, a pending school trip, perceived or actual lack of personal safety, parental divorce or separation, unexpected or extended parental absence, moving to a new house, the birth or adoption of a new sibling or fostering of a child, the death of a close relative, friend or pet, experiencing or witnessing violence or an accident, and experiencing traumatic events, for example, being a refugee. Morning rituals. The ritual or routine is designed to reduce emotional distress by increasing feelings of certainty and security for the pupil. It requires 2 key steps. Step 1. Establish a specific see you later area. Step 2. Provide a structured arrival activity. The place where the goodbye or separation from parent ritual occurs should be age appropriate. This might be where pupils line up, inside the front gate, or at the school office. Over time, the distance between the drop-off point and the entry can increase in incremental steps. Ensure the parent understands neither to draw out the separation nor to sneak away without saying, "See you later." When walking with the pupil away from their parent, distractions might help. Providing a structured arrival activity. Establish a planned activity for the pupil to engage in immediately when they arrive at school. The activity needs to be enjoyed by the pupil, and in some cases it can be helpful for the activity to include some responsibilities, particularly for older pupils. Have a backup plan if the morning ritual doesn't work. For example, with a younger child, a staff member might take the child gently by the hand and walk to a specified area, and the parent will say, "See you later, I will pick you up when the bell rings at the end of the day." The parent then leaves immediately. For an older pupil, following the goodbye, the pupil can be offered a choice of planned activities. For example, the staff member might say, "There are 3 activities you can go on with. Which one would you like to do? Or would you like me to suggest something you should start with today?" Supporting strategies with parents and carers. Allow the pupil to bring something associated with the parent with them to school. This transitional object can remain in the pupil's pocket during the day, and over time it can be placed near them for safekeeping. Set routines and boundaries for contact during the school day, for example by phone, and agree what happens if the parent is unavoidably delayed in picking up their child or being at home when they return. This might include specific plans about where a pupil will go or who they will stay with until they are able to leave school, including the named key adults and the place. And talk about increasing experiences of leaving their child for increasing periods of time and with greater frequency within normal family routines, as well as during activities outside of the home that do not directly involve the parent, for example clubs and spending time with a friend at their house. This can provide another step that further splits the transition from school to home. This is the end of this video. You can view more videos on this channel in the About series, including other About SEMH videos.